Hi, I'm Mary Greendale, and this is Just Thinking. Welcome to our annual series of interviews of candidates for local government offices. The town election is May 21st. We have contests for select board for an open seat. For planning board, we have an incumbent versus a challenger. And for school committee, we have 4 new candidates for 3 seats on the school committee. No incumbent chose to seek re-election to the school committee. I'm interviewing all these candidates. I have prepared questions specific to each board or committee. Each candidate will respond to the same questions for that office in their interview. This allows voters the chance to compare the candidates' approaches and thinking according to the issue. The interviews are done one at a time and will be posted when all the candidates for any office have been interviewed. My goal is to have the videos run 30 minutes, and they will be available on Holliston Hub HCAT's website, on Holliston Hub HCAT's YouTube channel, and on our Facebook page. Let's get started. Hi, so now let me introduce you to Hilary Bresnahan, and Hilary is running for the school committee. There are 3 vacancies and 4 candidates. So with that, we will start. Hilary, welcome.
Thank you.
All right, and you have 2 minutes to introduce yourself to me and tell me in the world why you're running, who you are.
Great. So I've lived in Holliston for about 20 years. My husband and his family have lived here for a lot longer than that, but I moved here about 20 years ago, followed my husband out here. We have 2 kids in the Holliston Public Schools, so that's given me a lot of opportunities to volunteer in our schools. I've coached both kids in their soccer teams and gotten to know some of our community members that way. And I've also been in education for the 20 years that I've been here in Massachusetts. I've been a teacher, instructional coach, district administrator, education researcher, and I worked at the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education for 8 years. So I've had a lot of different roles, but all of them kind of really thinking about how I can support schools improvement, support our teachers, and really thinking about what are the needs of our students. So I'm hoping to bring that experience and my desire to be of service to our community to the school committee.
That sounds great. Thank you. So what do you think the top 3 issues are today facing the school committee?
So from watching the school committee meetings this year and also kind of diving deeply into our district data, I think there's 3 primary challenges: special education, curriculum, and the budget. And I'd say those are really intertwined, not separate. Starting first with special education. Across the state, not just in Holliston, special education costs are rising. Out-of-district tuition costs are rising for kids that have specific needs that need to be serviced in a different school, and transportation costs too. And when we look at our district's budget, that's the line item that has seen the most significant increase this year. And once when we look at our district data, so we have more out-of-district placements in Holliston than the state average by far. And also we're well above the state target and some of our neighboring towns too. And for kids with disabilities who are serviced in Holliston, they're not growing at the same rates as their peers when we look at their performance on state tests. When we look at their passing rates of high school courses, it's not at the same rate as their peers, and they're 3 times more likely to drop out of Holliston High School. So I think that's an area of concern and focus for the district. Second, I would say, is curriculum, and I know this is an area the district is already looking at. They have a math curriculum committee going on right now. Currently, we have curriculum programs in math and literacy at the elementary level, but there's a lot of grades and content areas that don't have it, and that's a really critical tool for our teachers. As a teacher, I've worked in schools where I did not have a curriculum and schools where I had a high-quality curriculum, and there was such a difference. When I didn't have a curriculum, I spent hours and hours just trying to find resources that met the needs of my kids. And when I did have a curriculum, I could use that time to make adjustments to meet their needs or to think about questions I could ask them that would deepen their understanding. So I think that's a really important tool that we need to look at to support our teachers. Finally, the budget, of course. For anyone who's been watching the select board meetings and the school committee meetings, it's all about the budget this year. It is really tight just to level fund our budget. And looking at the education finance landscape over the next few years, I don't think we're going to see a change. So we need to be really creative with how we're using our resources to meet the needs of our students, and really think about how we can avoid as much as possible putting more burden on our taxpayers. Over the last few years, I've reached out to the district with grant opportunities that met their education goals, and I'd like to continue doing that. And I also would encourage the district to explore some of the programs that are open source, they're free, and endorsed by the Massachusetts Department of Education that would meet the curriculum needs that they're looking to fill right now.
Interesting. So I have two follow-up questions. On the first one would be about the curriculum. Do I understand you to be saying that there are some either grades or schools that do not have curriculum in place?
They have curriculum that's created by teachers, which is a lot of hard work for teachers to not only provide the instruction, but also kind of develop and vet that. But we don't have specific curriculum programs that are endorsed by the Massachusetts Department of Education that are aligned to grade level standards. It's not in place at all grade levels. I do know there's committees that are focusing on math now, and then we'll turn to other content areas, and I'm excited to support that work with the school committee.
Okay, and then the other question regarding the budget, when you have suggested grant opportunities, have they followed up with them? Are you able to, work with them? Have you worked with them, or where did that go? I guess that's basically it.
I'm not sure. I got a little response back. It was a little vague. I know that for Holliston, sometimes grant opportunities are provided to towns that have more of a lower income base or more students of need. The Department of Education really tries to target to need. But there are opportunities that are open to all districts, or where some of our neighboring towns have receive grants, like Hopkinton, Medway. So I'm not sure where Holliston has followed up, but that's certainly a question I would ask if I was on the school committee.
Interesting. So, do you attend town meeting, and do you understand its role with the schools? How would you describe that?
I have attended some in person, and a lot I've watched actually through HCAT. But and I also, as my role as an educator, I watch all of the State Board of Education meetings, and I also watch some of the school committee meetings for other towns as well. So I think I have a pretty good understanding of the role of the school committee. Very important in approving the budget, in developing education policies and goals for the district, and also appointing some of the leaders.
Okay, that's good. What do you think the role of the community, the member, you as a school committee member, what is your role within the community?
Yeah, so in addition to kind of serving those three primary roles of, appointing leaders, approving the budget, educational goals, I think that really my primary goal is to be a connection between the district and the community. So as a parent, kind of, I serve that stakeholder group, but also making sure that I'm connecting with other stakeholder groups in the community to make sure that kind of the voices of students, families, other community members, teachers are really represented, and also to ask questions to make sure that kind of the questions that community members might have are asked during school committee meetings, and make sure that when there's programs and budget items that are put forth, questions are asked to kind of think about, are those programs really aligned with our district data, with the district's educational goals?
When a follow-up question, so if in relating to the community and you're out there trying to gather input, okay, one of the most startling things to me right now is how small our school population is to the size, not just the size of the town, but the percentage share of people, the communities, families are in the schools. It always was that way more than half of the town had kids. I mean, like 80% of the town had kids, and now it's like 25 to 30% of the town has kids, which makes it really, really hard if the schools need overrides. or if the schools need any kind of extra support.
Yes.
How do you address that? Do you have a role there?
Yeah, so that's one of the things actually I've learned in the last couple of months, kind of in talking to people as I think about running for school committee. I learned that, as a parent, I get a ton of information from the schools, lots of newsletters from teachers, from the school, from the district, and I feel like I get a lot of information. But in talking to people, I realize that I'm getting that information as a parent, and if you're not a parent, you don't have as much access to information about the educational needs of the schools, what their goals are, what the challenges they're facing. So I'd like to learn more about how the school committee is currently communicating with other stakeholders and make sure that we're kind of expanding on that, but also think about too how the school committee is collaborating with some of the other boards and groups in across the town. So there's a lot of areas where we would overlap: the library, traffic, safety, a lot of similar concerns that affect schools and other areas of the town. So how are we collaborating between the different groups?
Okay. So what strengths and skills do you think you would bring to the community? Describe any particularly high thinking, cathedral thinking, the new word my neighbor mentioned to me the other day. I love cathedral thinking. Who builds a cathedral anymore? And I couldn't figure out exactly what it meant, and I looked it up, and it's that you're thinking not just of your generation, but for generations ahead, because sometimes it took 200 years to build a cathedral. Can you imagine in our world of instant gratification? Of course we don't think that way. We're lucky if we're thinking 5 years down the road. And so now, but if I look back again in our history, cathedral thinking, San Placentino with the French immersion with Montessori,
yes.
That's a perfect example. Middle school, he's the one who introduced all those things. Yeah. It's like, okay, somebody did, so got any thoughts?
Yeah, and now those programs are 35 or plus years in place. It's excellent. I think a benefit, an area that I would bring to the school committee is the number of districts I've worked with. So when working with the Massachusetts Department of Education, I had the opportunity to work with 27 districts across the state. And I've also worked with some other districts outside of Massachusetts across our country. And I think from there, I can bring some knowledge of the educational landscape beyond Holliston. Kind of what are the challenges that we're facing, and who's come up with an innovative solution that might benefit our town? What's working well in some of our neighboring towns that might benefit our kids too? Just kind of think about what do we need in Holliston, and also looking outside of our doors to other solutions as well. But I also bring a background in education data, so kind of looking at what does our data say about the needs of our students and where we have really strong programs in place, how are we monitoring those, and also understanding of the grant landscape. Where are there areas where we should be looking for grants? What are the grant opportunities that are available to schools, particularly towns of our size and economic demographics? Kind of where should we look further and kind of be more creative with our budget?
I did find the data that you mentioned about the underachievement of our special ed kids surprising and frightening, or upsetting.
Yeah.
At one point we were really highly regarded for what we did with SPED kids. And I realized that the volume of children and the money from the state has not come through. The state has disappointed every city and town in Massachusetts and not held up its share. But that's very disquieting. So anyway. So how did you react to the news that there was a vote against the superintendent, basically, and it was almost a year ago now. So it was a no confidence vote by I think 86% of the teachers, not all of them, but a healthy chunk of them. What did you make of that, and did that aspect contribute to your decision to run for this office?
I've actually been thinking about running for a long time since my kids started.
Okay.
But now they're kind of at an age where I'm like, I think I can do this. You know, I have the time now. But when I did hear about that vote, I was surprised, to be honest. But then I realized that my connection with the superintendent is very removed. It's only through those district-wide communications. So I don't really understand the kind of what the experience is like as teachers in the building. So I'd really like to better understand what are the challenges some of our teachers are facing. I have, reached out and spoken with a few of them to get a better understanding of that. But it was surprising, but it's also a very bold statement, and I think it's one that the school committee needs to take very seriously. Really kind of communicate and collaborate more with the teachers. I've heard some of them bring some of those concerns to school committee meetings during the public forum component. But just to think about, like, what are the challenges that teachers are facing right now? Are they different than they were in the past? Are we providing them with the right supports, the right amount of support, and how can we better support our teachers?
I think sometimes average residents, typical person, and I include myself in this, forget that the reason for the administrators, the principals and the assistant principals and all of those folks are there to support the teachers. Mm-hmm. And that they're not just, another layer for the sake of whatever, because they have nothing to do, not nothing, but they don't have the daily interaction responsibility for the kids' education. They're making sure that those teachers are getting what they need and are performing in the way they should. Mm-hmm. So I think that's one of the messages that was really hard for me to sort of grasp. I thought that was whatever. So this is a tough one, and it's a little bit. What kind of grade would you give the school system as a whole, and any one of the schools in particular? And if you don't want to do the schools because you have kids in the school system, I would understand that.
So that is really hard, even though, my kids have now gone through 3 out of the 4 schools. But it's still hard to give them a grade. I will say the middle school. I am so impressed with the work the teachers and leaders have done. So that school in particular went from the 85th percentile to the 93rd last year.
Yeah, that's good to know.
It is. They're performing as well as or better than 93% of elementary and middle schools in Massachusetts. And coming out of a learning loss from the pandemic, what's a very difficult developmental time in kids' lives.
The worst.
We don't typically see that kind of improvement in 1 year, and especially not for a middle school. So teachers are working really hard at supporting kids there. But overall, I don't want to give the schools individual grades, and not because I feel uncomfortable because my kids go there, but more so because the nice thing about Holliston is our kids flow from one school to the next. They go to Placentino, Miller, Adams, and the high school. So I really want to think about it as a coherent K-12 system. Mm-hmm. And in thinking about that, yes, special education, as I mentioned, is an area of growth. But I will say, when we look at our data now compared to how kids were doing before the pandemic, you may see newspaper articles about our children are in crisis, we're not performing as well as they are in math and literacy. When we look at Holliston, it's not the case. Our teachers are working really hard, and in some grades, and some content areas, our kids are actually performing better now than their counterparts did in 2019. And I think that's really a testament to our teachers and our leaders.
And it's something that we should hear.
Yeah.
I think I would welcome that information on those days when I'm thinking, oh my God, everything's going really badly, because that's all I hear is the bad news.
And there are challenges. I definitely hear from teachers there are challenges in the schools, but when we look at the data, there are some really strong areas in Holliston, which is why we're proud to send our kids here. But one area I think the district should look more deeply at is some of our vulnerable populations. So I mentioned special education earlier, but also our students from low-income backgrounds, English language learners. These are all groups where we're not seeing the same amount of growth as some of their other peers, and I think that's an area they could dig deeper into.
Yeah, I can remember before Superintendent Jackson left, and don't ask me dates, I guess he left in 2020, but a few years before that, he was talking about, at that point, we had 51 students that were English as a second language students, and he was just staggered, because all of a sudden now was this whole arena that we hadn't, we didn't need that much help with. We didn't need a whole lot of teachers. We didn't need to figure out schedules to accommodate and all the rest of it. And then, of course, COVID came along and created its own stressors and so forth. But I really do think that, Dr. Jackson was very adamant about how the transition as the town changes, and our demography has changed. We've changed in the last 10 years. 10% of the white families have been replaced by whatever other non-white combination that you have, because there are all kinds of combinations that they put on census things. But at any rate, so we have had a transition, a demographic transition, and that changes things in lots of different ways. And it doesn't make it easier. It doesn't make it easier.
Yeah.
So it's the question of being able to apply perhaps examples that from elsewhere, since we don't know that roadmap. That's not something we've done, kind of thing. It may be that that's where the answers will come from.
That would be great.
Yeah, I hope. So general public education, I think, has been sort of taking it on the chin at a national and sometimes state, but mostly national level. And I'm sure we've heard about towns, even in Massachusetts, where we've had sort of what I would consider reverse traditions, that instead of being progressive or being on the front edge of thinking, where we're sort of turning back and going back to some areas that we already know how they worked, So general education, now we have, all kinds of options for a kid. How do you value public education?
So I've always valued it as a fundamental right that students receive a high quality education, any child. And the reason I got into teaching 20 years ago is because that was my core belief, and I really wanted to provide all the kids in my classroom with an engaging, empowering educational experience. And that's why I've committed the last 20 years to kind of that same goal, is how can I really support quality education, whether I'm working at the state level or the district level or the classroom level, making sure that kids have access to what they need in the classroom. I think Holliston has a number of wonderful programs. We love that they have the Montessori, French immersion, and the traditional path that parents can choose and kind of meet the different needs and interests of their kids, and also offering Spanish at the elementary level too as a way to kind of continue to expand students' cultural knowledge and understanding. So I think Holliston has a number of wonderful programs here that we are excited about.
How do you feel about vouchers, school vouchers, and allowing people to take their money and run to another school?
That's a tough one, but I've learned that not every education system is going to meet the needs of every kid. However, in watching the school committee meetings, I have heard a lot about the impact on our budget when kids opt into other programs. Keefe Tech is nearby, Norfolk Aggie, charter schools, any other program, public program where kids are not enrolled in school does have a budget impact. And so I've wondered, how is the district exploring kind of what are the goals, the interests, or the educational needs that are not being met in Holliston that are making kids look elsewhere? And are there programs that we could either develop or strengthen to better meet those needs within our community?
I know that at one point, a couple of years ago, one of them was just the computer sciences, which seems like it should be a, quote, no-brainer, that kids shouldn't have to go to Keefe Tech for something like that. That seems so generic in these days, that every kid should have some pretty, more than just a fundamental how do you use the computer kind of thinking about technology.
Especially in Massachusetts with so many different tech industries. It's
really
a huge part of our industry. Yeah.
It's part of, it's a huge part of everything. So I do think that, that would be one that I've heard, and if you get elected, you can chase that one down. So in some districts, schools, the parents have tried to get control of what's going on in the libraries or what we're putting out for books or how we, our curriculum and so forth. How do you feel about that? How do you explain that?
That's a really hot topic in our house right now because every book that my child loves is on the one of the national banned book lists.
Of course, of course.
Of course. He's 13, so of course.
Yep.
So we have a lot of conversations in our house about, what makes something controversial, what makes someone feel uncomfortable about reading a certain book. But in our schools, I do think we have wonderful librarians, Mrs. Cannell at the elementary schools, our teachers, and I trust them to select engaging and challenging books for our kids. But at the same time, I've appreciated the way that our teachers really support two-way communication, so that if parents do have a question about a book that's selected or concern with maybe a task assigned to their students, I want to make sure that parents feel like they're partners in their kids' education and they can raise those questions and concerns as well.
I would think that would be a really important, but also maybe a challenging situation if the parents are not English speaking or not, if they're even newer to this part of the country or even to the country.
Absolutely.
They don't know the educational system, they don't know how it works, they don't understand who makes the decisions. Heck, you need a flow chart to be able to figure out how all the decisions get made. So I would think that would be extremely hard.
I think so. I think the district has done a good job of improving the amount of information on the website in terms of what is part of the curriculum, so the parents can explore that. I also appreciate the way, so in 5th grade at the elementary school, they start getting into some health issues that maybe parents might feel uncomfortable with at this age. So I appreciate the way they communicated and shared all of that information in advance so parents could opt in or out to some or all lessons or maybe preview some of the topics at home. But there's really been a lot of communication from the district so far.
Well, that's good to know. It's good to know. This is why I like having people come on and tell me. It's the only way I find out anything. Anyway, we've already touched on this, but the school committee has little direct authority over much more than what you talk about. And when you talk about, yes, you have policy, yes, you have supervision or ultimate hire and fire for the superintendent and the budget, but really you're one of 7 people. Yeah. And within the confines of that, there are real limits with the contracts and so forth. There are real limits about what you're allowed to do in terms of engaging teachers or engaging with supervisors or administration and so forth. So all of that aside, what would you walk away with hoping that you would accomplish in a 3-year term, not right away, but a 3-year term?
Yeah, so I definitely, a school committee does not have authority over operations or curriculum, nor should it, but I think the important role of the school committee is asking questions. So when items on the budget are raised, when programs are developed and considered, policies developed, the school committee can ask questions to make sure that what is being developed is aligned with our district data, that they've thought through not only why are we selecting this, but how are we going to measure its impact? And also ask questions to make sure that this is going to meet the needs of all of Holliston students, not just of specific groups. And also, how are the voices of the community, how are the students' voices represented in this policy, or how are parents, how have they been reached out to? Teachers, how are we supporting them? So I think an important role of the school committee is really in asking those questions. When I work with the Department of Education, so I work with 27 different districts, all of them were identified for needing support. Mm-hmm. And I never went in with answers because I don't have the answers. I'm from the state, I'm not from their district, but I always went in with questions. What are your goals? What are your concerns? What does your data say? And kind of through my questions, kind of help to uncover things and make sure that our thinking is aligned with the needs of the students.
Okay. Well, we've come to the end of the questions, so that gives you another 2 minutes to sort of wrap it up and put it all in one box with a bow.
Well, as I said, I'm really passionate about education. I've worked solely in education for the last 20 years in many different roles, but always with that goal of how are we supporting really high quality experiences for all of our kids in the public setting. If elected to school committee, I kind of hope to bring that passion, that experience, that knowledge of looking at educational data to monitor our progress, and also kind of my knowledge of education finance and grants to kind of help the budget situation as much as I could.
Yeah, and there will always be a need for that, guaranteed. We didn't even talk about MCAS, but anyway. So thank you very much. Nice to meet you. Hilary Bresnahan. You've done your homework, so please remember to vote on May 21st. It's important for you, your family, and the community. Thank you.